November 23rd, 1944. 20,000 feet above the Belgian countryside. The air inside the B-17G30BO is cold enough to freeze spit before it hits the deck. Second Lieutenant Harold R. de Bolt grips the yoke of the Flying Fortress, serial number 42-31909, his leather glove stiff against the control column. Outside the plexiglass nose, the morning sun cuts through scattered clouds, illuminating a patchwork of brown and green fields far below. The bomber, unofficially christened by its ground crew as a bird that always comes home, rides steady in formation, one of dozens of flying fortresses belonging to the 91st Bombardment Group, 320th Bombardment Squadron, pushing deep into enemy territory. The drone of 4 Wright R-1820 Cyclone engines fills every corner of the aircraft, a constant thunder that vibrates through the aluminium airframe and into the bones of the 10-man crew. In the nose compartment, Bombardier Second Lieutenant John E. Humphrey hunches over his northern bomb sight, making minute adjustments. Navigator Second Lieutenant Robert Bruce sits beside him, plotting their course back to Bassingbourn, England, once the bombs are away. Behind them, in the radio room, Technical Sergeant Robert Pohl monitors the frequencies, listening through the static for recall orders or warnings of enemy fighters. This is mission 231 for the 91st. The target, German positions near Liège, Belgium, part of the ongoing effort to support Allied ground forces pushing toward the Rhine. The flak has been moderate so far, black puffs of smoke blooming at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, scattered across the sky like deadly ink blots. De Bolt adjusts trim, keeping the bomber steady. His co-pilot, whose name will be lost to the incomplete records of that day, scans the instrument panel. Oil pressure normal, cylinder head temperatures in the green, fuel flow steady. Then the Germans find their range. The first burst catches the B-17 low on the starboard side. The impact sounds like a sledgehammer against a tin roof, a sharp, metallic crack that reverberates through the fuselage. Fragments of shrapnel tear through the thin aluminum skin, shredding hydraulic lines and puncturing the starboard fuel tanks. In the waist, staff sergeants scramble as aviation fuel begins to mist through the compartment, the acrid smell of 100-octane gasoline mixing with the stench of cordite and burned metal. "We're hit!" The call crackles over the interphone, urgent but controlled. This crew has flown together through 23 missions. They know the drill. De Bolt feels the controls go mushy. The yoke responds, but sluggishly, fighting him. He glances at the co-pilot, who's already scanning the gauges. Engine number 3 is running rough, the tachometer needle dancing. The airspeed indicator drops 180 knots, then 175. They're losing altitude, falling out of formation. Around them, the other bombers of the 91st maintain their tight box. But 4 2-319-09 is slipping back, becoming vulnerable, a wounded bird separating from the flock. Another burst of flak detonates close enough to rock the aircraft. The tail gunner reports a fire in the number 4 engine. De Bolt reaches for the engine cut-off switch, shutting down fuel to the starboard outboard right cyclo. The propeller windmills for a moment, then freezes, feathered against the slipstream. 3 engines now. The B-17 can fly on 3 engines, it can fly on 2 if it has to. But not with a fuel leak, not with damaged hydraulics, not this deep in enemy territory. Pilot to crew. De Bolt's voice is steady on the interphone. Prepare to bail out. We're not making it home. In the nose, Humphrey and Bruce exchange glances. They've drilled this. They know the procedure. Humphrey begins gathering his navigation equipment, while Bruce moves toward the forward escape hatch. In the radio room, Pohl is already disconnecting his oxygen line. The waist gunners move to the waist door, sliding it open. Wind screams into the fuselage, a frigid blast that tears at their flight suits. The altimeter reads 18,500 feet, and unwinding, De Bolt engages the autopilot, the Sperry A5 system that allows the bomber to maintain heading and altitude without constant input from the pilot. It's a temporary measure, meant to give the crew precious seconds to escape while the aircraft holds steady. He doesn't know, none of them know, that this simple action will transform a routine bailout into one of the most bizarre incidents in the history of the 8th Air Force. Go, go, go. The order is given. One by one, the crew abandons the stricken bomber. They tumble into the thin, frozen air above Belgium. Parachutes snapping open, white silk canopies blossoming against the grey November sky. Inside the B-17, the autopilot continues its work. The aircraft flies on. The last man out is the Bolt himself. He hauls himself from the pilot's seat, takes one final look at the instrument panel, autopilot engage, trim tab set, engines 1, 2, and 3 still turning, and makes his way toward the forward escape hatch. The bomber shudders beneath him, but is flying level, holding altitude at 17,000 feet. He drops through the hatch into the howling void. His parachute deploys with a sharp jerk. The sudden silence is profound. Gone is the roar of engines, the rush of wind through the fuselage, the crackling voices on the interphone. Now there is only the whisper of air through silk and the distant rumble of the formation continuing northeast without them. Below, the Belgian countryside spreads out in miniature. Villages, roads, the silver thread of a river. De Bolt counts shoots 1, 2, 3, 4. He counts again. 9 shoots past his own. 10 men. The entire crew is out. Above them, the B-17 continues flying. It shouldn't. By every reasonable expectation, the damaged bomber should enter a spiral, nose over, or simply fall out of the sky. The Sperry autopilot is a marvel of 1940s, engineering a system of gyroscopes, servos, and pneumatic actuators that can maintain heading and altitude, but it's not designed for this. It's designed to give pilots a respite on long overwater flights, to hold the aircraft steady during bombing runs. It's not designed to fly a crippled bomber alone, with no human input, across enemy territory. But 42 to 31909 doesn't know that. The autopilot does what it was built to do. It senses deviations in pitch and corrects them. It detects a drift in heading and adjusts the rudder trim. The 3 remaining engines, numbers 1, 2, and 3, continue their steady thunder, pulling the bomber northwest at 165 knots. The damaged fuel system continues to leak, but slowly, the wound not quite mortal. The hydraulic pressure drops, but the autopilot runs on pneumatics, drawing compressed air from the engine-driven pumps. As long as the engines run, the autopilot functions. The B-17 crosses the Meuse River. It passes over the scarred landscape of the Ardennes, where in 3 weeks, German forces will launch their desperate winter offensive. It continues northwest, an aluminum ghost piloted by gyroscopes and servos, a flying fortress with no one at the controls. On the ground, Belgian civilians hear the distinctive sound of Wright Cyclone engines and look up. They see a lone bomber flying lower than the formations usually do, heading west. Some wave, thinking it's a crippled American aircraft limping home. Others take cover, unsure. In the tower at a Royal Air Force forward airfield near Louvain, a controller spots the aircraft on approach and attempts radio contact. Unidentified B-17, this is Louvain control. State your intentions, over. Static. The bomber flies past the field, maintaining heading, maintaining altitude now down to 12,000 feet. B-17, you are clear to land any runway. We have emergency equipment standing by. Over. No response. The bomber continues west. RAF intelligence will later note this sighting in their reports. They will describe the aircraft as flying in a controlled manner, but failing to respond to repeated radio calls. Observers on the ground report seeing no visible crew through the plexiglass nose. The bomber simply continues its ghost flight, tracking northwest toward the coast. It crosses into France. The engines run smoothly now, numbers 1 and 2 in perfect synchronization, number 3 running slightly rough but still producing power. The aircraft has burned through nearly half its fuel. The leak from the starboard tanks is slowed as fuel pressure drops, and the reduced weight actually improves its performance. The B-17 climbed slightly, seeking equilibrium, settling at 10,000 feet. The English Channel appears on the horizon, a grey expanse of wind-chopped water. The coastline of occupied Europe slides beneath the bomber's wings, gun emplacements, concrete bunkers, the Atlantic wall defenses that Allied forces breached 5 months earlier on D-Day. German radar stations track the aircraft. Flak batteries traverse their guns, but hold fire. A single bomber flying west, clearly damaged. Let it go, it won't make it across the channel anyway. But it does. The B-17 crosses the beach, crosses the surf line, and heads out over open water. The autopilot maintains heading 290 degrees, almost due west-northwest, a heading that will take it across the narrowest part of the channel toward England. The distance is 70 miles. At 165 knots, that's 25 minutes of flying time. 25 minutes over cold water, in a damaged aircraft, with no pilot, no navigator, no engineer to monitor fuel consumption or engine temperatures. The bomber flies on. In the waist section, a sheaf of navigation papers flutters in the wind from the open waist door. The sheets plastered against the bulkhead. In the radio room, the transmitter sits silent, its dials and switches untouched. In the cockpit, the control yoke moves in tiny increments, responding to signals from the autopilot, making corrections too subtle for the human eye to detect. The throttles remain where DeBolt set them, 3 levers pushed forward, 1 pulled back and feathered. The mixture controls are rich. The propeller pitch is set for cruise. Every setting is exactly as it should be for a bomber heading home, except there is no one home to bring it there. 15 minutes over the channel, the English coast appears through a break in the clouds, the white cliffs, the green fields beyond, the patchwork of hedgerows and stone walls that define the southeastern counties. The B-17 makes landfall near Dover. It continues inland, still tracking northwest, still at 10,000 feet, still flying as if someone, somewhere, is at the controls, but the cockpit is empty. The aircraft is a Flying Dutchman, a Marie Celeste of the air, a perfectly functioning bomber without a soul aboard. Over the Kent countryside, the B-17 begins a gradual descent. There's no logical reason for this. The autopilot is designed to maintain altitude, not to initiate descents. Yet, at 2:47 p.m., according to Royal Air Force observers at Manston Airfield, the lone bomber begins dropping at approximately 300 feet per minute. It's a controlled descent, the kind a pilot would execute when preparing to land. Steady, deliberate, the nose dipping just a few degrees below the horizon. Flight Lieutenant James Harrington is in the tower at Manston when the reports come in. Single B-17, inbound from the southeast, no radio contact. He raises his binoculars and spots the aircraft against the grey November sky. Even from 3 miles away, he can see something is wrong. The bomber is too low, flying at maybe 6,000 feet now, and there's visible damage to the starboard side. Dark streaks of oil or hydraulic fluid trail from the number 3 engine. Manston Tower to B-17, you are approaching our airspace. Please acknowledge. Over. The radio crackles with static, nothing else. Harrington tries again. B-17, you appear to be in distress. We have a clear runway and emergency equipment. Please acknowledge. Silence. The bomber continues its descent, but instead of lining up with Manston's runway, it maintains heading 295 degrees, passing 3 miles north of the field. Harrington watches through the binoculars, waiting to see the aircraft bank toward the runway, waiting for some sign that the pilot sees the airfield. The bomber flies straight on. He's not turning, Harrington says to his deputy. Why isn't he turning? Maybe his radio is out. Then why isn't he waggling his wings? Why isn't he firing a flare? Harrington lowers the binoculars. Something's very wrong with that aircraft. He's right, but not in the way he thinks. The B-17 continues west-northwest across Kent, descending through 4,000 feet now. It passes over the village of Chilham, where school children playing in the yard stop and point at the low-flying bomber. It crosses the Great Stour River. The engines are still running. The sound is unmistakable, that deep, rhythmic pulse of American radials. But the aircraft is clearly looking for somewhere to land. Except there is no one looking. The cockpit is empty. The pilot's seat where DeBolt sat 40 minutes ago is vacant, the control yoke moving on its own in small, precise movements. The co-pilot's seat is empty. The bombardier's station in the nose is abandoned. The radio operator's desk sits unattended. 10 men bailed out over Belgium, and not one has returned. At 3:02 p.m., the B-17 descends through 2,000 feet. It's flying over farmland now. The patchwork fields of the Kent Weald spread out below. The aircraft banks slightly just 5 degrees to the left. The autopilot correcting for a crosswind, a mechanical anomaly. No one will ever know for certain. The bomber straightens out, tracking 290 degrees now, and continues its descent. 1,500 feet, 1,000 feet. The landing gear remains retracted. There's no hydraulic pressure left to extend it, even if someone were in the cockpit to lower the handle. This will be a belly landing, whether intentional or not. The bomb bay doors hang partially open, damaged by flak over Belgium, creating additional drag that accelerates the descent. 800 feet. The engines are throttled back now, or perhaps they've simply burned through enough fuel that their power output has decreased. The bomber is flying at 120 knots, just above stall speed. It's the speed a pilot would maintain on final approach, the speed you fly when you're about to touch down, 500 feet. The B-17 crosses over a hedgerow. Below is a large field, recently ploughed, the soil dark and soft. It's not a runway. It's not even flat. But it's open, and the bomber is descending toward it, as if guided by an invisible hand. 300 feet. Farmers working near the village of Mersham look up at the sound of engines. They see the B-17 coming in low, too low, and they run. They expect an explosion, a fireball, the standard conclusion to a bomber crash. They've seen it before, crippled aircraft coming back from raids, trying to make the coast, failing in the last miles. 100 feet, the bomber crosses the tree line at the edge of the field. Its shadow races across the ploughed earth below. The tail wheel, still retracted, clears a wooden fence by less than 10 feet. 50 feet, 20 feet. Belly contacts the soil with a long, grinding scrape of aluminum against earth. The bomber slides forward, ploughing a furrow through the field, mud spraying up from the fuselage. The plexiglass nose digs in slightly, then rises. The aircraft slews left, corrects, continues sliding. The starboard wingtip catches the ground, pivots the bomber slightly, but not violently. A bomber slides another 200 feet, slowing, the friction of earth and aluminum, bringing it to rest. The engines shut down, one by one, number 1 first, then 2, then 3, starved of fuel or perhaps damaged in the landing. The propellers windmill to a stop. Silence settles over the field, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal and the hiss of escaping hydraulic fluid. The B-17 sits motionless in a Belgian field, no, an English field, hundreds of miles from where its crew abandoned it. Steam rises from the engine cowlings. The aircraft is battered, scarred, leaking fluids from a dozen wounds. But it's intact, structurally sound. The fuselage hasn't broken. The wings haven't folded. The tail section stands upright. It's a perfect belly landing, the kind an experienced pilot would be proud of. Except there is no pilot. There is no crew. The bomber is completely, utterly empty. The first to reach the aircraft is Thomas Whitfield, a farmer whose land borders the field where the bomber came down. He's 62 years old, a veteran of the Great War, and he's seen enough military aircraft over the past 5 years that he knows what he's looking at. An American B-17 Flying Fortress. He's watched them pass over by the hundreds, heading east toward Germany, returning west hours later, sometimes trailing smoke, sometimes with engines out, sometimes not returning at all. But he's never seen one land in his neighbor's field, with no warning, no distress signal, no crew scrambling out after touchdown. Whitfield approaches cautiously, keeping low, aware that the aircraft might explode or catch fire. Aviation fuel is pooling under the starboard wing, creating a rainbow sheen on the muddy ground. He circles around to the nose, where the plexiglass bombardier's compartment provides a view inside. Empty. He moves to the waist door, still open from when the crew bailed out over Belgium. He pulls himself up, his boots slipping on the aluminum, and peers inside. Hello? Anyone hurt in there? His voice echoes in the empty fuselage. No response. He climbs inside, moving carefully, expecting to find wounded men, or bodies, or at least some sign of the crew. The radio room is abandoned. The navigation table in the nose has charts spread across it, a pencil rolled into a corner. In the cockpit, the pilot's and co-pilot seats are empty. The control yoke sits centered. The throttles are pulled back. The mixture controls are in idle cutoff. Everything is exactly as it should be after landing, except there is no one here who could have done it. This is impossible, Whitfield mutters. He's talking to himself, to the empty aircraft, to whatever force or fate brought this bomber down safely in an English field with no human hand at the controls. He climbs out and runs toward the road, toward help, toward people who will believe what he's just seen, or more likely, people who won't believe until they see it themselves. By 3:30 p.m., the field is swarming with personnel. Royal Air Force intelligence officers arrive from the nearest base. Military police secure the perimeter. Fire crews stand by with foam. Though the danger of explosion has passed, the fuel has mostly leaked out and the engines are cold. An American liaison officer from the 8th Air Force arrives in a jeep, a major named Thornton who takes one look at the bomber and demands to know where the crew is. "There is no crew, sir," says the RAF intelligence officer, a squadron leader named Price. "The aircraft is empty." "That's absurd. Someone flew this aircraft. Someone landed it."
"I assure you, Major, we've searched the aircraft thoroughly. There are no personnel aboard, living or dead."
Thornton climbs into the B-17 himself. He checks the cockpit, the nose, the radio room, the waist section, the tail. He checks the ball turret, hanging beneath the fuselage. He checks the crew rest area. He finds flight jackets, oxygen masks, a half-eaten sandwich in the radio room, a deck of playing cards in the waist. He finds personal effects, wallets, photographs, letters from home. But he finds no people. He returns to the ground, his face pale. "Where the hell did they go?" "We believe they bailed out, sir," Price says. "Somewhere over the continent." The aircraft then continued flying and landed itself. Aircraft don't land themselves. And yet, here we are. The investigation begins immediately. Intelligence officers photograph every inch of the bomber. They document the damage, flak holes in the starboard side, the shredded fuel tanks, the damaged hydraulics. They note the autopilot is engaged, the selector switch in the on position. They examine the Sperry A5 system, checking for malfunctions or modifications. They find nothing unusual. The autopilot is functioning exactly as designed. They reconstruct the flight path, using reports from RAF observers and civilian witnesses. The bomber was spotted over Belgium at approximately 2:20 p.m., heading northwest. It crossed the channel around 2:35 p.m. It made landfall near Dover at 2:43 p.m. It flew across Kent for 20 minutes before descending and landing at 3:04 p.m. Total flight time after crew bailout: approximately 40 minutes. Distance traveled: nearly 200 miles. But the question no one can answer is why? Why did the bomber descend? Why did it land? The autopilot can't do that. It can maintain altitude and heading, but it can't execute a landing pattern. It can't throttle back engines. It can't flare before touchdown. Unless something else happened. Unless the damage to the aircraft, the loss of fuel, the change in weight distribution created a condition where the bomber naturally descended. Unless the engines, starved of fuel, reduced power on their own. Unless the aerodynamics of the damaged airframe, with its partially open bomb bay doors and asymmetric fuel load, created a glide slope that just happened to bring the aircraft down in a field at the correct speed and angle for a survivable landing. "It's a 1,000,000 to 1 chance," Price says that evening, writing his report. Everything had to go exactly right. The autopilot had to keep flying. The engines had to keep running just long enough. The descent had to begin at exactly the right moment. The field had to be there, open and soft enough to belly land without breaking up. And yet it happened. While investigators in England puzzle over the empty bomber, the crew of 42-3-1909 is scattered across the Belgian countryside, dealing with their own desperate situation. Second Lieutenant Harold de Bolt lands in a plowed field 2 miles southeast of Liège. His parachute collapses around him, and he quickly gathers the silk, bunching it against his chest. He's in occupied territory. German forces still control this region, though the front lines are fluid, constantly shifting as Allied armies push east. He can hear artillery in the distance, a low rumble like thunder that doesn't stop. He pulls out his escape kit, a flat package containing a silk map of Western Europe, a compass disguised as a button, concentrated food tablets, and Belgian francs. He buries his parachute in the soft earth, covering it with loose soil and dead leaves. Then he starts walking west, toward where he hopes Allied lines are, staying off roads, moving through hedgerows and tree lines. He's not alone in this. Across a 10-mile radius, the other 9 members of his crew are making similar calculations, hiding parachutes, checking maps, trying to orient themselves, Bombardier John Humphrey lands near a farmhouse and is immediately taken in by a Belgian family who hide him in their barn. Navigator Robert Bruce comes down in a forest and sprains his ankle on landing. Radio operator Robert Pohl lands in a village square, nearly on top of a German supply truck, and has to run for his life into nearby woods. The Belgian resistance is active in this area. Within hours, several crew members make contact with underground networks, farmers, shopkeepers, ordinary citizens who risk their lives to shelter downed Allied airmen and guide them back to friendly territory. It's dangerous work. The penalty for harboring enemy airmen is death, not just for the individual but often for their entire family. Yet they do it anyway, night after night, airman after airman. De Bolt walks for 3 days. He sleeps in barns, under bridges, once in an abandoned German foxhole. He eats concentrated rations and, when those run out, raw vegetables stolen from fields. On the 4th day, exhausted and disoriented, he's spotted by a Belgian partisan named Jean-Claude Mercier, who approaches him cautiously, hands visible, speaking in careful English. "American? You are American, yes?" De Bolt nods, too tired to be wary. "Come, I will help you." Mercier takes him to a safe house, a stone cottage where an elderly woman feeds him soup and bread, while Mercier makes contact with other resistance cells. That evening, 3 more crew members arrive: the co-pilot, one of the waist gunners, and the tail gunner. They embrace, relieved to find each other alive. They share stories of their landings, their close calls with German patrols, the kindness of strangers. "Did anyone see what happened to the plane?" the tail gunner asks. "It was going down when I jumped," De Bolt says. "Must have crashed somewhere in Belgium." They assume this. They all assume it. There's no other possibility. A damaged bomber with no crew can't fly itself 200 miles and land safely in England. That would be absurd. Over the following week, the resistance moves them west in stages, hiding in cellars during the day, traveling in false-bottom trucks at night, once being smuggled across a checkpoint in coffins meant for a funeral procession. They cross into liberated France on December 2nd, 9 days after they bailed out. From there, U.S. military intelligence processes them, debriefs them, and eventually transports them back to England. They arrive at Bassingbourn on December 8th, expecting to be assigned a new aircraft, a new set of missions. Instead, they're met by Major Thornton and Squadron Leader Price, who escort them to an interrogation room. "Gentlemen," Thornton begins, "we need to ask you some questions about Mission 231, November 23rd. "Yes, sir," De Bolt says. "We took flak over the target, lost engine number 4, had fuel leaks and hydraulic failure. We made the decision to bail out." "Over Belgium," Thornton interrupts, "at approximately 2:20 p.m. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir. We couldn't make it back. The aircraft was too damaged." Thornton and Price exchange a glance. Price opens a folder and slides a photograph across the table. It shows a B-17 sitting intact in a muddy field, its belly on the ground but otherwise undamaged. "Do you recognize this aircraft?" Price asks. De Bolt leans forward, studying the photo. The serial number is visible on the tail, 42-31909. "His aircraft. That's impossible." "Sir, where was this taken?" "Kent, England. November 23rd, at approximately 3:05 p.m. The crew members stare at the photograph in stunned silence. The co-pilot speaks first. "I don't understand. We all bailed out. There was no one left on board." "We know," Thornton says. "We searched the aircraft. It was empty." "Then who flew it?" asks the bombardier. "Who landed it?" "That," Price says quietly, "is what we're trying to determine." The interrogation lasts 3 hours. Intelligence officers walk through every minute of Mission 231, from takeoff at Bassingbourn to the moment each crew member jumped from the aircraft. They want details, exact times, exact altitudes, the condition of the aircraft when abandoned, the status of every system. De Bolt explains the damage. "Flak hit us low, Starboard side at approximately 1,155 hours over the target area. We lost hydraulic pressure almost immediately. Engine number 4 caught fire, and I feathered it. We were losing fuel from the starboard tanks. I could smell it in the cockpit. The aircraft was controllable, but barely. We couldn't maintain altitude with the formation. What was your altitude when you made the decision to bail out? Price asks. Approximately 18,000 feet, descending through 17,500. And the autopilot? DeBolt pauses. I engaged it before I left the cockpit. Standard procedure, it keeps the aircraft stable while the crew evacuates. Did you set any particular heading? No, sir. I just engaged it to hold whatever course we were on, maybe 290 degrees, roughly northwest. I didn't expect. He trails off, looking at the photograph again. I didn't expect it to keep flying. The navigator, Robert Bruce, provides additional details. After the hit, I calculated we were approximately 35 miles southeast of Liège, over enemy territory. There was no way we'd make it back to England, not with the damage we'd sustained. The channel crossing alone is 70 miles. We didn't have the altitude or the fuel. And yet the aircraft made that crossing, Thornton says. On autopilot, with no crew. The autopilot can't make decisions, Bruce insists. It can't navigate. It just holds whatever course you set. If I'd stayed on board and guided it, maybe we could have made it back. But unmanned? Flying for 40 minutes? Crossing the channel? Descending at the right time? Landing in a field? He shakes his head. That's not possible. But it happened. The evidence is irrefutable. The bomber sits in a field in Kent, examined by engineers, photographed from every angle, its systems analyzed and documented. And the more they examine it, the stranger the story becomes. The autopilot, they discover, was not malfunctioning. It was working perfectly, doing exactly what it was designed to do, maintaining heading and altitude through a system of gyroscopes and pneumatic servos connected to the control surfaces. But the autopilot had no way to initiate the descent that began over Kent. It had no way to throttle back the engines. It had no way to execute a landing, unless the aircraft did those things itself. We need to consider the aerodynamics, says Flight Lieutenant Gerald Mason, an RAF engineer brought in to examine the bomber. He stands in the field beside 42 to 31909, pointing to the damage. Look at the starboard side. The flak punctured 2 fuel tanks here and here. As fuel drained from these tanks, the aircraft's weight distribution changed. The center of gravity shifted forward and to port. Would that cause a descent? Thornton asks. It could, over time. The autopilot would try to compensate by adjusting elevator trim. But if the weight kept shifting as fuel burned off, eventually the aircraft might enter a shallow descent that the autopilot couldn't fully correct. What about the landing? How do you explain the engines shutting down at exactly the right moment? Mason crouches beside the number 3 engine, examining the cowling. Fuel starvation. The bomber was running on 3 engines, pulling from damaged tanks. When the usable fuel finally ran out, the engines quit, one by one. The timing was pure chance. They happened to quit when the aircraft was at the right altitude and speed for a belly landing. And the fact that there was an open field directly in its flight path? Also chance. If the bomber had been 50 yards further south, it would have hit those trees. 50 yards north, it would have struck that farmhouse. The aircraft simply happened to come down in the one spot where a belly landing was survivable. Thornton rubs his temples. So you're telling me this was all coincidence? A series of mechanical failures and aerodynamic anomalies that just happened to result in a perfect landing? Not perfect, Mason corrects. Lucky. Extraordinarily, impossibly lucky. But yes, that's what the evidence suggests. The official report, filed by Squadron Leader Price on December 15, 1944, concludes, Aircraft 42 to 31909 continued flying after crew evacuation due to engaged autopilot system. Subsequent descent and landing attributed to progressive fuel exhaustion, shift in center of gravity, and favorable aerodynamic conditions. No evidence of crew remaining aboard. Incident classified as extraordinary, but explicable through mechanical and environmental factors. The report satisfies the bureaucratic requirement for an explanation. It provides a framework for understanding what happened, a series of logical steps from bailout to landing. But it doesn't satisfy the men who were there. DeBolt reads the report and shakes his head. They're saying it was luck. Just dumb luck. Maybe it was, says the co-pilot. You don't fly a crippled bomber 200 miles across enemy territory and the English Channel and set it down gently in a field through dumb luck. That's not luck. That's... He struggles for the word. That's something else. Then what? Asks Bruce. Divine intervention? The ghost of some dead pilot guiding it home? I don't know, but I know what I'm going to call it. DeBolt looks out the window of the barracks at the gray English sky, thinking of his bomber sitting in a field in Kent, empty but somehow home. The Phantom Fortress. The name sticks. Within days, it spreads through the 91st Bomb Group, then the 8th Air Force, then the entire theater. The story is too strange, too compelling not to share. Ground crews tell it to mechanics. Mechanics tell it to pilots. Pilots tell it to their crews. By Christmas 1944, nearly every airman in England has heard about the B-17 that flew itself home. Some believe it, some dismiss it as propaganda or exaggeration, but everyone remembers it. Because in a war where death comes suddenly and often senselessly, where aircraft and crews disappear without trace, where good men climb into bombers and never return in that war, the idea that sometimes, just sometimes, the aircraft themselves might watch over their crews and bring themselves home safely, that idea is worth believing in. B-17, G serial number 42-3-1909, never flies again. The belly landing, gentle as it was, caused structural damage that the engineers deemed too extensive for field repair. The fuselage is bent slightly aft of the radio room. The skin is buckled along the keel. The landing gear, jammed in the retracted position by the loss of hydraulic pressure, is damaged beyond economical repair. More critically, the airframe has absorbed stresses that can't be fully assessed without complete disassembly microfractures in aluminum longerons, fatigued wing spars, compromised bulkheads. In peacetime, the bomber might be rebuilt. In December 1944, with aircraft rolling off Boeing's production lines at a rate of 16 per day, it's more cost-effective to salvage what's useful and scrap the rest. Over the following weeks, the Phantom Fortress is systematically stripped. The 4 Wright Cyclone engines are removed, inspected, and returned to service in other aircraft. The guns, twin 50 caliber machine guns from the nose, cheek positions, dorsal turret, ball turret, waist positions, and tail, are cleaned, tested, and redistributed. The instruments are pulled from the panel. The radio equipment is salvaged. The armor plating is cut away. Everything that can be reused is cataloged and sent to supply depots. What remains is a hollow shell, a skeleton of aluminum ribs and stringers sitting in a Kent field. In January 1945, a salvage crew cuts it apart with torches, reducing the Phantom Fortress to manageable pieces that are trucked away to be melted down and reformed into new aircraft, new bombers that will carry new crews over Germany. The physical aircraft ceases to exist, but the story doesn't die. The crew of 42-3-1909 completes their tour of duty. DeBolt and his men fly 17 more missions between December 1944 and April 1945, assigned to a different B-17, a different aircraft with a different name. They survive the war. All 10 men who bailed out over Belgium on November 23rd make it home to the United States in late 1945, beating odds that killed or captured nearly half of all 8th Air Force airmen. DeBolt, in particular, can never quite let go of what happened. In the years after the war, he corresponds with Squadron Leader Price, with Flight Lieutenant Mason, with other officers involved in the investigation. He obtains copies of the reports, the photographs, the witness statements. He becomes, in a sense, the unofficial historian of his own impossible story. In 1947, he writes a letter to Roger Freeman, the aviation historian who is beginning research on what will become his definitive work, the Mighty Eighth. Deboldt describes the mission, the damage, the bailout, the recovery. He ends with, "I've read the official explanation. Fuel starvation, center of gravity shift, lucky aerodynamics. Maybe that's all it was. But I was the pilot of that aircraft for 6 months. I knew her temperament, her quirks, the way she handled in turbulence and under fire. And I'm telling you, Mr. Freeman, what happened on November 23, 1944, was not just mechanics and luck. That bomber wanted to come home." Freeman includes the story in his book, published in 1991. By then, Deboldt has been dead for 3 years, having passed away in 1988 at age 72. But his account, preserved in letters and interviews, ensures that the Phantom Fortress becomes part of the official history of the 8th Air Force. The 91st Bombardment Group Historical Society maintains records of every mission flown by the group during the war. Mission 231 is noted with an asterisk and a footnote. Aircraft 42-31909 landed intact in England after crew evacuation. No casualties. Aircraft scrapped January 1945. The bare facts, stripped of mystery, reduced to a bureaucratic notation. But among veterans of the 8th Air Force, particularly those who served with the 91st, the story takes on a different quality. It becomes something more than a historical curiosity. It becomes a talisman, a lucky charm, proof that sometimes the odds can be beaten through means that defy complete explanation. In the 1970s and 80s, as aviation enthusiasts and historians begin researching wartime incidents with renewed interest, the Phantom Fortress story resurfaces. Articles appear in aviation magazines. Television documentaries mention it as a footnote to broader stories about B-17 operations. Each retelling adds small embellishments. Some sources claim the bomber circled the field twice before landing. Others suggest it actually extended its landing gear. None of these embellishments are supported by contemporary evidence, but they persist anyway because a good story demands elaboration. The truth, preserved in RAF intelligence reports and witness statements, is strange enough without embellishment. A damaged bomber flew itself 200 miles, crossed the English Channel, and executed a survivable belly landing with no one aboard. The autopilot, designed only to maintain heading and altitude, somehow brought the aircraft down at the right place, the right time, the right speed. Mechanical explanations can account for some of what happened, but not all of it. Not the timing, not the precision, not the almost eerie sense that the bomber knew what it was doing. Martin Bowman, in his 2007 book, The B-17 Flying Fortress Story, devotes 3 pages to the incident. He interviews surviving ground crew members who worked on 42-31909 before its final mission. One mechanic, James O'Connell, recalls, "She was a good ship, that one. Never gave us serious trouble. Some bombers, they're cursed always something breaking, always some problem. But 31909 was solid. We called her a lucky bird. Turns out, we were right." The story endures because it touches something fundamental about the relationship between airmen and their aircraft. In a war where death was statistical, where survival often depended on factors beyond anyone's control, weather, enemy fighters, mechanical failure, sheer chance, there was comfort in believing that the machines themselves had some agency, some capacity to protect their crews even after those crews were gone. Did the Phantom Fortress really want to come home? Did some combination of autopilot algorithms and aerodynamic forces create an emergent behavior that mimicked intentional action? Or was it simply, as the official reports concluded, an extraordinary concatenation of coincidences? The answer depends on what you choose to believe. The evidence is the same either way. A bomber that should have crashed in Belgium, or the Channel, or the Kent countryside, but instead landed itself gently enough that investigators initially thought the crew was hiding nearby as a prank. 10 men bailed out over enemy territory. 10 men survived. And one B-17, flying on nothing but gyroscopes and servos, and perhaps something less easily quantified, brought itself home one last time before being cut apart and returned to the raw materials from which it came. The Phantom Fortress is gone now, its aluminum redistributed across a dozen different aircraft, its story gradually fading into the vast archive of World War II's countless strange tales. But on quiet nights at air shows, when vintage B-17 seconds fire up their engines and the sound of Wright Cyclones echoes across the tarmac, old men who flew them remember. They remember aircraft that brought them home, despite impossible damage. They remember crews that survived when they shouldn't have. And some of them, if you ask, will tell you about a bomber that flew itself across the Channel and landed empty in an English field on a November afternoon in 1944. Because some stories, true in every particular, are still too strange to sound believable. And some aircraft, it seems, refuse to let their crews down, even after those crews have already let go.